Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again this evening to Wednesday nights with myself, Inayat Wadi, the first of the shows that we host every Wednesday night right here on Salam Media. As we welcome our listeners, our viewers on Salam Media, on the various platforms. Wonderful that you are able to join us, and we are back. It is a new year. It is the year 2023. But the question is, how promising does this year look? And when one looks at South Africa, the biggest albatross, the biggest noose that is hanging around the necks of South Africans at this point in time is the dreaded load shedding and the problems of Eskom. The question is, looking ahead at the year, how many darker days actually lie ahead for the country? And we've seen since December, since the resignation of Andre de Ruyter, we've just seen that stages 5 and 6 bouts of load shedding, and it's actually just getting worse now. This is clearly a worrying picture, and there are calls for a state of a disaster as far as Eskom is concerned, talking about ring-fencing the state of disaster on Eskom, so that at some point in time, the focus or the main focus at this point in time would be on Eskom. Now, we've got a panel that we've assembled this evening. We've got Ruse Moleshe, who is an energy expert, infrastructure finance specialist with 23 years of experience in energy and infrastructure across sub-Saharan Africa. She is also a co-founder and the managing director of RUBK Pty Limited, an infrastructure advisory and consulting company. We've got Thando, Makhubu, Soweto Creamery, Soweto ice cream business, praised by President Cyril Ramaphosa, but this business is now melting away due to the ongoing load shedding. We also have got, shortly we'll be joined by Mametlwe Sebei, who is the president for the General Industries Workers Union, and they are calling for the national shutdown against tariff increases. We've got Kekeletso Khena, AZAPO deputy president, currently staging a sit-in protest at the NERSA head office. And we've got Zakhele Madela, who is an energy expert. Going across to the screen, I see Ruse Moleshe is on. I see Kekeletso is on as well. And hopefully we will be joined by the others shortly. But to both of you at this point in time, good evening. I see Thando has come on as well. To all of you, welcome to the show and wonderful having you with us this evening.
Good evening, and thank you very much for having us.
Yes, I'd like to actually start off with Ruse, who is on the top of the screen, and being an energy expert, and at this point in time, looking at where we are as far as Eskom is concerned, Ruse, just looking at the power utility, or the resignation of Andre de Ruyter, and where the power utility finds itself in at this point in time. Oh, I see Ruse is try logging out and in again. We've got, Kekeletso. Let's start off with you then. It is clear that, you are staging a sit-in protest at the NERSA head offices. We've heard of the 18+ % increase that is taking place. The country at this point in time is in a darkness. And just looking at your position as a ZAPO and how you are viewing the electricity crisis, the power crisis, and also the load shedding, which is obviously moving to stages higher than we've ever seen before.
Thank you so much. As a ZAPO, we know that we do not have an energy crisis, so to speak. What we have is a crisis of corruption. We have a crisis of incompetence. We have a crisis where people are looking to privatize state resources and disguise it as an energy crisis. What we do know is that we don't have an energy crisis. What we have is a bunch of hooligans who are greedy, who are incompetent. We have a careless state. Everything else is disguised as an energy crisis, so that people start to think that, Eskom is problematic, we must look for other sources. That's not our problem. The problem is the greed. The problem is incompetence and the The problem is corruption. So that's where we are starting off, and which is exactly why we are finding ourselves at NERSA, by the way, who do not have load shedding. In the 72 hours that I have been here, there has not been a second where we have not had power.
Thank you for that, Kekeletso. And let's just bring Ruse Moleshe into the discussion. And I just want Ruse to comment on what you have said. Ruse, this energy crisis, is it an energy crisis in disguise, as Kekeletso alludes to, or just looking at it from purely from an infrastructure perspective, looking at it purely from all the reasons that have been given by the power utility, by the government, as far as the energy problems are concerned? I mean, is there more to it than just being a crisis in disguise?
Thank you for the opportunity. Good evening to everyone. From my perspective, I wouldn't get into the semantics of whether we have a crisis or we don't have a crisis. Obviously, an economy that is impacted by infrastructure that is not functioning in the way that it is a challenge for the citizens. It's a challenge for industry. It's a challenge for the agricultural sector, for commerce. Everyone who's in the economy is affected negatively by load shedding. So I would say that we are having a problem. And yes, the problem, there are many contributions to the problem. There are technical contributions to it. There are corruption issues we cannot run away that have contributed to where we are, and all other aspects that have contributed. But the bottom line now is that we have this problem, and as South Africans, we should be solving it so that all of us who are in this problem can get over it, because it's not going to help us. The problem is getting worse. We have coal-fired power fleet that is not performing as it should. It's performing very intermittently, and this is affecting business. It's affecting everyone. And the important thing is to come to look at what are the solutions.
Well, thank you for that, Ruse. And let's just bring Thando into the discussion as well. Thando, I'm not too sure if he's on screen. Thando seems to have disappeared for some reason or the other. But Kekeletso, let's just continue with you and listening to what Ruse is obviously saying, that, you know, obviously the economy, and these are valid points that she has raised with regard to the economy, regarding agriculture, and all of that has been suffering. But at the end of the day, you know, we find that this state of disaster that Eskom actually finds itself in, and we see that there are many political parties calling on the government to declare Eskom a state of disaster. Would that be a correct assessment at this point in time?
I would agree that it is in a state of disaster. I would agree that Eskom is completely non-functional. We agree that where Eskom is at the moment, it's a liability to the state. Eskom is in debt, making us as a country not a going concern. They continue to rack in serious amounts of debt that they are unable to service. They continue to rack in serious amounts of debt by their failure to, one, do basic things like collections. They are failing to do basic things like provide power, because when you are providing power, you have customers that are paying. When you are not providing power, nobody is going to pay you, and therefore you are running in a deficit. So the truth of the matter is that Eskom is a liability, and it is in a state of disaster. It is destroying the economy, it is destroying jobs. Food prices have gone up purely because of the cost of production and everything else. So it is, in fact, a state of disaster, and it is destroying our country, and it's something that the state actually needs to reel in. But as we already know, the state is actually incapable of reeling in Eskom, because we would not be in this place where we are right now, because with the regulator like NERSA, whose job it is to reel in Eskom and make sure that they are delivering on their mandate to ensure that they provide power so that we can meet our socioeconomic needs, they've failed to hold them accountable. In actual fact, they continue to reward their incompetence and their inability to provide the service for which they have been formulated.
Thank you. And I see Zakhele Madela is on the line as well. Zakhele, good evening to you and welcome.
Good evening to you, sir. Good evening to the listeners.
Yes, Zakhele is an energy expert at this point in time. Are you surprised that to the stage where we are at this point in time, where we see this worsening crisis and we see higher stages of load shedding, and also at the same time, all these calls now for Eskom to be called a national state of disaster?
I'm not surprised because remember we have been at a cold face of this for the past 5 years. We formally started on this journey in May 2018, and it was informed by the executive of Eskom, who had been reluctant to sign the independent power producers because they knew the impact of taking their very own business and handing it over to the competition. Eskom business is to generate electricity and sell electricity, but because we haven't got much time, the executive of Eskom were made to sign power purchase agreement of their own competitor who was eating into their market share. When these men and women of Eskom were reluctant to sign that, the government stepped in and forced them to sign, and the contract was signed at night. And then we organized ourselves in May 2018 because this forced signing by the politicians of the ANC happened in April. Now, to cut a long story short, we have been constantly making noise about the impact of not looking after the assets of Eskom, at being biased in terms of what money we accept, what money we don't accept, what technologies we accept, what technologies we don't accept. But it's been all falling on deaf ears. Now we have a crisis with the electricity generation system as it is, never mind planning for future. These are compounding problems that have been brought by the politicians of the African National Congress, together with the white monopoly capital, who've made Eskom a home of creating millionaires for their friends of the friend and their families of the family. Unfortunately, Eskom wasn't going to take all of these abuse forever. The people to go to jail is the politicians, is the relatives of the politicians, is the friends of the politicians. I'm afraid to tell you, South African, there will never be a solution for Eskom before certain people go to jail and money are recovered from them. The technicality of Eskom speaks to a lot of money that is required. Financial institutions are struggling to find any value in financing anything that's going to do with Eskom with this debt of 396 billion rand. We've got to clean that up first. And we cannot clean it because we are not there. It is this very government. We must arrest these politicians. We must get into each and every contract and put them in jail. I'm sorry to say this to you before I give other people a chance to speak. President Ramaphosa has got 2 independent power producers. President Ramaphosa is nicked his partnership with South 32. He put it under Pembani Putumantlego, who then put it under Tede Investment. This government, they backed the deal of Seriti Resources instead of the deal of the state-owned mining firm. These are high-ranking officials of government, including the president must be held into court and be arrested. Pravin Gordhan must be arrested. Can you arrest Ramaphosa and Pravin Gordhan in this country? I'll just stop there.
Thank you for that, Zakhele. And I see Mametlwe Sebei has also joined us, and just to get his thoughts initially on the on what we are trying to obviously unpack this evening. Mametlwe, I see he is trying to connect. There we go. I see you on screen. Mametlwe, good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening to you and to the listeners of Salam Media.
Yes. Now, it is clear that from the introduction, we've seen a lot of concern raised with regards to Eskom, where we are at this point in time as the power utility, but also at the same time, look at the responsibility on the part of the powers that be. We're looking at the government, we're looking at organizations like NERSA as well, that has oversight as far as Eskom is concerned. We've seen the approval of the tariff increases by just over 18%. And that came about a few days ago. Now, all of that put together, and the theme of tonight's discussion is putting all of this together. Where are we? How critical is the situation? And we've seen in the past people like Praveen Gordhan, and I've seen Zakhele mention about Praveen Gordhan. And Praveen Gordhan in May 22 made a statement that Eskom is not in a state of disaster. He went on to say why it is not in a state of disaster, and the reliance on higher levels of load shedding to ease the problem or to ease the power generation problem. Just your thoughts, Mametlwe.
Well, I think we've got to say that crisis of Eskom is a crisis of capitalism par excellence. And what do I mean by that? One is to locate this crisis with the broader crisis of the capitalist profitability, because what we are seeing is that as the capitalist class are, of course, running against the limits and contradictions of their system, they are seeking, accumulation by dispossession, which in this case actually entails plundering and looting of public services, including Eskom, but it's not only Eskom. There's SAA, there's all these state-owned entities which across the board are actually in crisis. And at the core of that crisis is a plunder, not only for accumulation, but actually because this is very functional and instrumental to profitability in this point in time when the capitalist class are actually facing with the crisis across the industry and so on. Of overproduction, of overcapacity, that has also created this particular crisis of, the falling rate of profit. Now, what are we dealing with? Eskom has been plundered by, the ANC elite, but it's not only ANC elite in isolation. ANC, of course, benefit from contracts in Minipi, in Kusile power stations, contracts in outsourced services in Eskom, but the entire corporate and capitalist class are actually part of it. You look at the supply chains of Eskom. You look at the fact that there's coal industry, which is strengthening Eskom. Many of these politically connected coal miners, I'm talking about Siriti, I'm talking about Lenko, I'm talking about Shanduka, which is a company of president. All of this are charging Eskom way above what other suppliers are actually charging for the same quality and quantity of coal. And we've got to ask, what is the basis for that, right? If not, of course, the extortion, which I'm saying is not just down to the question of, ethics of certain individuals, but to the fact that particularly the black capitalist class, this is the only way in which they can be able to accumulate. This corruption is actually functional to their formation as a class. Now, you look also at the demand side of Eskom. There is what you call energy intensive users. If you look at the composition of that board, not only is people who some of them traditionally have been from the coal mining industry, from the mining industry. I mean, the current chairperson of the board is from ArcelorMittal. ArcelorMittal has applied for a special tariffs. One of the members there is a former chairperson of what you call the energy intensive users group. What is this group? It's a group of several companies in the smelting industry, in the mining, and in the manufacturing industry that are are called energy intensive users, and that qualifies them for what we call special tariffs, some of which arguably are below a cost of production of electricity. That is, they are being sold Eskom not only at a cost below what I and you pay as a household, but actually at a cost below that of generation of Eskom. Now, any person who has a basic understanding of business and accounting will tell you, you will sell about 45% of any product that you sell or any service at the cost that these special tariffs entail. That business will not be profitable. That business will not be able to even break even. Just to give you an example, one of the members of this group is actually BHB Bilton, which own the smelters. The Highfield, I think that's the name of the smelter there in Richards Bay or something like that. is the biggest consumer. At some point, actually, they owned all of them. I think now they've sold them. But the two of them, they were consuming about 10% of Eskom electricity. Yet, BHB Billiton at the same time was contributing less than 1% of Eskom's income. So I want to put an emphasis on this because you've got to contextualize it. A company consuming between 9 to 10% of Eskom's overall electricity supply, contributing less than 1% of its income. What model of business is that which would make any such company sustainable? So what is the way forward? I don't think you are going to solve this problem on the basis of all the solutions that have been put by the capitalists. That's not the ANC, not the DA, because let's be clear about it. DA is probably fearful about this crisis because for them it proves that public ownership is not working. For them, it support the agenda for privatization. But we should be clear. We are in this crisis precisely because of the attempt to privatize Eskom. In the 90s, when the planners and the experts in Eskom said, we need to invest in new capacity. Otherwise, 2008, 2009, we're going to have load shedding. Thabo Mbeki and the ANC administration at the time refused. Why? Because they felt if you invest more in Eskom, if you burden Eskom with that necessary, as they saw it, to generate new capacity, Eskom is not going to be attractive for sale, for private investment, and therefore that will frustrate their privatization agenda. So we are in this because of that. Of course, fast forward, 2008, 2009, we start to have load shedding, right? As we begin to have load shedding, then they fast-tracked all of this program. We spent about 700 billion on Eskom, the maintenance and expansion of the current capacity in the past 15 years. Yet, 15 years later, 700 billion later, Eskom is operating at 25 capacity less than where it was. They have been demanding that the working class must pay for that with astronomical increases in terms of tariff. Not only 18.6% that they are proposing, this 18.6% taken cumulatively with all other increases of the past 15 years amount to overall 800% increase in terms of tariffs. That has resolved no problem, has resolved any of the problem of Eskom. It has made filth rich, few cooperations, politicians linked to them. At the same time, it has created unprecedented level of energy poverty that has sunk many into a cost of living crisis, that has sunk many into a situation where women in rural areas are beginning again to be hewing wood, but also many people in informal settlement in urban areas are resorting to unsafe and unhealthy forms of energy that are becoming dangerous and that are responsible for some of these farms, for some of these fires that has destroyed not only property, but many lives in many informal settlements.
Well, thank you for that, Mametlwe. And I just want to bring Ruse into the discussion since, we are looking at a whole financial now. I see Ruse is not on screen. Perhaps we've just lost her. But I see Thando is with us. Thando, good evening to you. If you could unmute your mic, please.
Good evening, everybody.
Yes, Thando, just to bring you in now, clearly, I've just looked at your profile, Soweto Creamery, Soweto ice cream business, praised by President Cyril Ramaphosa, melting away due to ongoing load shedding. And we know not only businesses like yourself, but many, many businesses at this point in time are suffering as a result of load shedding. What is your situation, Thando?
My situation at this point, I am fortunate that I was able to invest in a generator about a year ago. So having that helps slightly, but running a generator obviously requires a continuous cost. And as you know, the petrol price is really high. I remember the previous week or 2 weeks ago, right after New Year's, we never had electricity for like 3 days. we spent over 1,000 rand on petrol alone. So what I'm trying to say is that if it continues like this, it's going to be a problem for us as well, even though we have a generator. So we really feel left out as small business owners. They encourage us to start brands and things like that. But then if they can't keep the lights on, what are we supposed to do?
Yes. Now, Thando, I know the government has been encouraging small business growth for a long time. They've targeted small business as an area of opportunity for for the benefit of the economy, employment, to overcome the unemployment problem as well. But under the circumstances at this point in time, how difficult is it to operate? And again, looking at the government, its objectives that they have set out, but again, not making it easy for businesses like yourself as a result of not addressing the power crisis adequately.
So at this point, as I said, it's really, really hard because we it's almost like we are employing an additional person, which is a generator at this point. And if it continues like this, at this point, it's eating away our profits. And if it continues, we have to lay off some of the employees. And at an unfortunate situation, we'll have to close Soweto Creamery, and it's going to add on the unemployment rate and the stress and all of those things. So if this issue is not resolved as soon as possible, it's going to be a problem. Yes, we are looking at alternatives. We want to be off-grid because we can't really rely on Eskom anymore because they don't take us seriously, you know. So we are looking at investing at inverters and lithium cells and things like that. But the initial cost is really, really expensive. You are looking at 100,000 plus for a reliable setup to maintain the company that I have created.
Thank you for that, and we'll just bring Kekeletso back into the discussion. Kekeletso, I know you've been at the NERSA head office and you are there having a sit-in protest. Your video had actually gone viral, and also at the same time looking at what both Mametlwe and also has been saying with regard to the government, 700 billion that has been spent, and 700 billion later, we are sitting with a problem. Now, clearly, there are agendas that are playing out. We've heard about white monopoly capital. We've heard about, capitalism at the forefront of this crisis, and the agendas that have been playing out. There have been many talks about who is in control, who is in charge, in whose interest is the government making decisions with regard to Eskom. And I'd just like, your thoughts against what Mametlwe has been saying as well.
I couldn't agree more. We know for a fact that the state has been making decisions to either serve capital or their friends. It's sad that most of us have to look at the Eskom crisis, with the today lens. The issue of Eskom comes from way back. We know that, yes, with the sunset clauses came these special tariff clauses that allowed people to continue to benefit and profiteer at the backs of Eskom. And the current state has allowed it purely because either they are shareholders or they've got friends or family who benefit from that. That is one aspect. The second aspect is the fact that when we talk about the scramble for Africa and we're talking about the scramble for resources, we seem to forget that people have plans for South Africa. They have plans for Africa. For instance, we know that when you look at the concept of economic assassins, there are people who target governments, and they produce documents that outline these outlandish strategies of what would happen if we used nuclear power, or if we used ships, power ships, etc., etc. There are people who strategically develop these documents so that they can extract money from our country. So if we think that Eskom is an isolated political case, then we are completely off the mark. There is a lot at play where Eskom is concerned. And it is true that one of the things is to make Eskom look as unviable as possible so that we can start looking at other alternatives. And those alternatives will obviously make money. They will make money for the directors of NERSA, as it has been said in social media, because the director of, actually the chairperson of the board himself, has under-declared his interest in energy producing companies, like PowerX, for instance. He claims that he has resigned. He also claims that he has fully declared, but he hasn't, because we are in possession of records that show us that he is still an active member of several companies that are power producing. So in actual fact, it is in their interest to collapse Eskom so that they can continue to benefit from these new alternatives that everybody is touting, forgetting that the truth of the matter, privatizing power is actually disempowering Black people. Privatizing power pushes Black people further into poverty. But beyond that, if we do go the route of actually privatizing power, what will then happen is that the state will have to subsidize the cost of power production. So making sure that these private companies will make money and that they will be profitable at the backs of creating poverty, as well as controlled access to power, and further marginalizing Black people. The truth of the matter is that we are lying to ourselves if we think that apartheid economic structures will allow for Black people to ever have economic access. You look at Soweto Creamery and how, in fact, they are struggling. The truth of the matter is that it actually serves white economy, white capitalists, for Black people to continue to buying brands that are owned by themselves. And so to destabilize the economy, the so-called upcoming economy of Black entrepreneurs, serves this very interest. So to think that this happens in isolation really would be ridiculous, because we know that there is a plan to destabilize the country, to make us look at apartheid as though it was a state of haven, and that everything was working back then, when in fact we know that the development Eskom that we inherited was only developed to service a small fraction of our population. And this is why we are still failing to roll out power to rural areas and previously ignored Black areas. So there's a lot at play. And yes, the ANC government has failed our people. It has failed to ensure that we can have power. It has failed to build Eskom. It has failed to innovate. When we talk about power generation issues, we know that some of these turbines are years old. The people who used to produce parts no longer do that. I'm failing to understand why we have not taken that as an opportunity and started looking at how we can then use new technologies like 3D printing, etc., to start building new parts for these machines, so that we are not fixing old parts and creating employment using new technology and young people. Why are we not innovating around our problems? It's because we don't want to solve this problem. This problem pays us. Right now, this hike that we are talking about is 331 billion that will be given to Eskom in one financial year for them to splurge and to destroy our economy. That is completely absurd. So someone is getting paid. We know for a fact today that Eskom employees get access to a canteen where they can buy a decent lunch for between 8 and 15 rand. You can't get a decent lunch anywhere in the country. These people have jobs, and yet their food is subsidized. Something is wrong with this picture. Somebody is benefiting. I'm not going to go into who owns those canteens, but we know for a fact that the inefficiencies of Eskom fund politicians, they fund their families, and they fund the destruction of our country for the betterment of I'm not sure who, because even these so-called politicians aren't making it themselves. They themselves are pawns in a greater international scheme of profiteering from the poverty and the pain of Black people.
Yes. Now, I'd like to bring Zakhele back here into the discussion. And Zakhele, against what Kekeletso has been saying, talking about the ANC government and taking the ANC as a party as well and a government taking responsibility. Now, just recently as today, we've seen the ANC caucus in Parliament wanting every single Eskom power station manager to account for breakdowns, telling Eskom, we are tired of your lies. We want to get to the bottom of this. We want every power station manager to come and account, talking about if there is mismanagement under their watch. We want to know what they've done. Now, suddenly, we've seen this caucus actually come and demand all these explanations, demanding all these answers, and at the same time, demanding concrete plans to solve the crisis, whereas this crisis has been around under the watch for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you properly. I don't know what happened, but I got a few points that you want me to touch on. I think let's humble ourselves, South Africans. The government is not going to provide the solution. If you want to know that the government is not going to provide the solution, you must look at what the strong opposition party like the Democratic Alliance is doing. It is interested to expose the ANC, not to solve the electricity crisis. It is interested to push the ANC to admit that the solution is private and is nothing else but private. So the government officials know what they did. We know they've been in partnership with private sector to hollow out Eskom. So it cannot be them that provide the solution. And that's why the Democratic Alliance is not interested to tell the people what actually is the breakdown of this 396 billion rand. You will never hear the DA talking about how did we get to a state utility owing 394. The reason for that is the Democratic Alliance knows that the fingers are pointing at the private sector that is completely raped Eskom, facilitated by the ANC official. Now, what is the solution? The solution is let's take everything away from the governing party. Let's accept that the Democratic Alliance, even though it's an official opposition in this country, has refused to be part of the solution. We South Africans, we are calling for a 2-week national dialogue where we scrutinize each and every single contract. How did we get to here? We must talk about the full breakdown of the 396 billion rand. How did it come about? We must talk about the decisions that the government is unable to make in order to get Eskom back on its feet. If you talk about coal contracts, we all know what needs to be done there. You only need to ask yourself, why are the coal suppliers repeatedly supplying poor, bad quality coal? If you talk about the units breakdown, we have never been told what is the nature of those breakdowns. If you talk about the contracts that are competing with Eskom, like the independent power producers, we hear there is a clause to review those contracts because there was signed on the premise that there was going to be more power demand, so therefore the cost didn't matter. Now we are in trouble. The question is, why are those contracts not being renegotiated? We know the politicians and their friends are part of those contracts. So in summary, from my side, it is time to take all of this away from the governing party as well as the Democratic Alliance. It doesn't matter how much noise they make. We must organize ourselves into a 2-week national dialogue, talk about this, inform South Africans who's responsible for all this debt, what decisions need to be made. Then the South Africans can say, we're shutting down the country, we're putting the country on the same speed until you people execute all of these decisions, because we've got facts on the table that Eskom can be saved, but it needs all the people who accept that they have been part of the demise of Eskom, unfortunately cannot be held ransom forever. If we don't take away the power from the governing party, we'll be back again here next year, we'll be back again here in 3 years' time, we'll be back again here in 10 years' time, because we are asking the very same culprits to resolve the problem that they created themselves. They will not. Let's take over Eskom by way of exposing things that they should be doing and put pressure so that some of them are tried for these things, some of them are just stripped of the powers to preside over these matters. That is all I can say. I don't see any other solution. We can't go and take on the streets and the protest without the evidence, without the information of what needs to be reversed. But we can't stop the people either. But let us allocate the time for that 2-week national dialogue and put all the information on the table.
Thank you for that, Zakhele. Every government speaking about have been giving us ominous signals that we can expect load shedding right until 2027. Now, clearly, these are ominous signals and messages coming through. Now, I seen earlier on, there was a question that came through for Thando from Mohammed Arai saying, what's your thoughts on the impact of load shedding on small businesses and those who have had to close down directly because of load shedding? Thando, have you heard my question?
I've heard your question and I saw your question. Obviously, my thoughts is that it's terrible, it's bad. Our country is becoming a banana republic, and as the planet is suggesting, the country is being run by people who don't care about the citizens, but who care about themselves. And it's said that it's political and it's about money and it's about power and all of those things. As a politician, your main objective is to serve the people. But these people, they don't care about us. And they say that we are in a democracy, but clearly we are not. Because a democracy, it's for the people, by the people. But in our case, it's for them, by them. So it's heartbreaking. And I think that the other issue is us as the citizens. We need to come together and put the politicians or the leaders in a hot seat and ask them relevant questions. The citizens are only active during the voting time, and that's not really fair. You see, we need to come together as a people and address all of the issues that we feel are not being addressed. I mean, we've had a load shedding ever since 2007. You see, we've had a load shedding for 16 years, and clearly they are not interested in fixing it. So we need to protest and take action as soon as possible.
Thank you for that, Thando. And just to bring Mametlwe back into the discussion, looking at the ANC, now I see there is another question. It says, privatizing power is indeed disastrous. Comrade Deputy President Kekeletso Khena, the current government inherited a poison chalice coupled with a lack of innovation on the part of the misruling ANC. I will ask Kekeletso to respond to that in a minute, but let me just go back to Mametlwe about the ANC caucus that has now woken up, that is demanding explanations, that is demanding answers from management, from the power stations. Yet we've seen over a period of time, we've seen so much in terms of theft, in terms of sabotage, just so much that has taken place. And these are all the reasons that have been given to the public as a result of as to why the power stations cannot function at an optimal level. Just your thoughts, Mametlwe, that these were organs of the state that were available to the government all the time. Whether we're talking about the police, whether we're talking about the military, whether we're talking about prosecution, now all of that obviously is coming out to the fore. Now this is where the answers are being sought. Yet it was within the power of government, within all these organs of the state, to do something all these years. Suddenly, we've seen this wake-up call when we are heading towards stage 8 of rolling blackouts and load shedding.
Yes, I mean, I think the ANC is playing gimmicks with the people of this country. One, because yes, they bear a direct and immediate responsibility for the crisis of Eskom. The reality is that they are, in actual fact, people who have facilitated that corruption, because both as an organization, and I mean, we can talk about Hitachi here and their own investment arms, which have been found guilty by the foreign courts, have been fined, and ANC is what linked to that. They benefited from the corruption in Medupi and all of that. These are people who, through their domination of government, obviously through the ministry, they appoint the board, and through the board, the management of Eskom. So to the extent that there is incompetence, to the extent that there's mismanagement of Eskom, they are also, again, they're responsible is their own cadres or people that were chosen by them, not directly by the South African people. Therefore, for them to come and say, well, there has been mismanagement over years when this problem has been there. But I don't think really the question of Eskom is just about the competence of people that occupy those offices. It's really about the capture of Eskom by cooperate interest across its supply chain, both, as I've said, those that are supplying with energy and those that, of course, are getting energy from Eskom. Now, let me just deal with issues that have also come in the context of this particular discussion. I mean, I heard Kekeletso saying that there's the issue of them bringing alternatives, and I think there's a narrative that I think we've got to object to that, and I think that has been facilitated by the ANC, by the way, where the the program to transition to renewable is somehow conflated with independent power producers. There is absolutely no reason that this has to be conflated. Firstly, because some of the IPPs, by the way, are privately owned coal power stations, which there's nothing renewable. There's nothing clean about that. It's the same amount of fossil fuel and pollution that we get out of a coal power generated through Eskom-owned stations and so on. So that shouldn't be conflated. But here's also the thing, that we have a crisis of climate change. And this is not the message for the future. It's a reality that is increasingly becoming an unprecedented ecological catastrophe to face humanity. In this country, it is here and now. We lost over 500 people in the flooding in KZN. And that flooding was not the first. In the past 5 years, KZN was hit by 3 floods, 2017, 2019, and of course, last year. Now, the people who pay the human cost of this are working class people in formal settlement, are working class people in poorly built, RDP houses. There is absolutely no mitigation measures that are being taken to ensure that there is adaptation to the reality of climate change. But more than that, this country is not moving away from that. And this is a country, by the way, with enormous resources, in terms of renewables. I mean, I hear people saying, well, the Western imperialism doesn't want us to use our coal. Now, I always ask the question, if a coal is South African, why the sun over this country is not South African? Why the coastal line that create, or rather has an enormous, vast wind power that can electrify most of this country? Again, then, ridiculous, arguments that have been advanced against that are ridiculous. I had a discussion in one of the media platforms, someone saying that that is not reliable. Now, I've been to the sea, and I think many of you here, and I think your viewers have been to the sea. At what point have you ever seen a sea stand still and there are not waves and currents in the sea? Never, right? All of that is energy. In this country, you have an all year round sunshine in big parts of the country. I'm from Limpopo. Either is summer, winter, all of that is energy. And the reality is, what people are not realizing, Fossil fuel is also a fuel from is also an energy from the sun, right? It's only that it's an old wood that fossilized into a coal. And what we are having here is that you have a scenario where when you burn a fossil fuel, basically you are digging, the sun, energy that has photosynthesized over millions of years. So it's almost like bringing all, sun from all these thousands and hundreds and millions of years, all of them, you put them in the atmosphere at the same time, and that's the reason that this planet is burning. When we have an abundance of sun in this country that we are not tapping into, but also that create possibility of a localized ownership. Not only that, but more than that, where we can have working class household, we can make every household in this country a power station, so to speak, which not only will it get a free, reliable electricity, in fact, they can fit and sell back that electricity back into the grid and so on. So that's the first point. But I also think that one of the mistakes that I think the comrades need to be careful. I mean, I hear the point about, the workers, their canteens in Eskom and so on. It would be a terrible mistake for comrades to think that the problem is Eskom ordinary workers. The benefits that are there, including that canteen, they are nothing. What is a crisis in Eskom? Eskom today has a debt of over 400 billion. Where does that debt come from? It comes from Midupi. It comes from Kusile. And when Kusile was planned in 2008, it was projected to cost about 8 billion. 2019, it had cost close to 250 billion. The same, escalation in terms of cost happened in Kusile. And all of that is because of the systemic and industrial plunder of this institution by big corporations, by NC politicians that are facilitating and so on. What do we need? The working class must organize. And I agree, probably is a difference in terms of language with the comrades that are saying we need a dialogue. And what is that dialogue? That dialogue is not going to be with the ANC. That dialogue is not going to be with the mining industry and so on. The mining, coal mining in particular, must be expropriated, as of course with other key sectors of the economy. What we need is the dialogue within the workers' movement, among the trade unions, amongst community civics, the climate justice movement, small business people in this country, where we are able to say, what is the perspective for Eskom going forward? How do we make sure that we build additional capacity for a reliable energy? How do we make sure that we transition justly so, but also rapidly, to a reliable, safe, clean energy that can provide a reliable quality access to energy for all, particularly the working class people who are suffering an increasing energy poverty, as I've said. Now, these are conversations we need to be able to have. And that's the reason that as GIWUSA, we're calling on the workers' movement to prepare and organize for a national shutdown. We are saying that we need a program of sustained rolling mass action in this country to force out all the corporate interests in the governance of Eskom. We are demanding a democratic control and management of Eskom, as we do of all key sectors of the economy, so that this economy, this Eskom, can work in the interest of the working class, of the poor, to provide a reliable, and accessible energy for all. But more than that, we want economy that can be able to work for the working class as a whole. And for that, ANC must go out of power. For that, we need revolution. For that, we need the working class in power in this country. Thank you very much.
Yes, Kekeletso, just to bring you back into the discussion, and I know there was a question that had come through for you as well, but also at the same time, from what Mametlwe is actually saying is, what we're finding is this whole debate surrounding coal versus renewables. And at the same time, when one looks at South Africa, where on the one hand, we know that sub-grade coal has been a problem at Eskom, at the coal-powered coal power stations, but also looking at South Africa and looking at our exports of coal, A-grade coal by the millions of tons is leaving the shores of South Africa through Richards Bay. Now, clearly, what is happening with all that revenue that is being generated if we want to move away from coal and get into renewables or other forms of alternative forms of energy?
So I'll start with the question of the poisoned chalice. When we talk about the poisoned chalice, we talk about the negotiated settlement. And I know that we spoke earlier about how certain companies, including BHP Billiton, are the ones that actually benefit from, using a lot of our power and not really paying for it. This is the poison chalice that we are talking about, where the current government actually negotiated to destroy the country upfront, because there is no way this economy was going to work if, in fact, people would be taking of the resources of the country, to profit of the resources of the country, and not ever plow back in the form of paying for those resources, but also in the form of reinvesting in those in the country, because we know that these profits then eventually leave the country. Which brings me to the second case where we're talking about our resources, key prime resources, leaving the country to go and service international communities. You just spoke about how we have A-grade coal leaving the country. Our A-grade coal leaves the country to go and do what the international community is telling us to stop doing. We must stop using coal because it's creating all of these problems in the environment. And we agree that all of us internationally, we have a responsibility to the environment. However, the people who are setting the agenda, the people who are driving the narrative for the eradication of the use of coal are the ones who are buying our A-grade coal, which means our country must stay in darkness. Our country cannot develop its economy by using this very resource that they are using to further grow and empower their economies. So basically, it's okay for us to extract the gold, to rape the land, so that the West continues to benefit of our resources, which brings us back to the subject of these very renewables. We know these renewables use batteries. These very batteries need resources. They need resources that are under the earth, meaning that we must still go and mine those resources and take them out of the earth throughout the African continent. So what we are saying is that it is okay for children in the Congo to go and dig up cobalt. It is okay for women to get beaten and raped in those war-torn countries so that the resources can be cheaply given to China, as well as all of these countries that will then produce these batteries that will power the international community and this new green revolution. So it is okay to come back to Africa and rape the earth by actually extracting these resources and ensure that we are not growing our economies. But we must ensure that the West can have a clean economy for their children, whilst Black children are forced to go and dig up, these resources required to build batteries. I'm not against renewables. I'm saying let us find innovative ways that are not going to put Black children, in particular Black people, and this continent back into the age where the West continues to profit and build the West at the expense of Africa. This is not an isolated conversation. This is what I've been saying. The issues around Eskom are not isolated. There are big international issues that are speaking to the recolonization of our continent and our resources by using these documents that are designed and developed to create mass hysteria around the climate, around climate change. We know climate change is real. We know about this big ozone layer. We know that it is real. But do we know that by stopping coal and by continuing to bring in other equipment that are going to rape the earth, we are not going to be releasing more gases into the atmosphere that are going to continue to destroy the atmosphere to such an extent that the world will not be livable? We need to find more sustainable ways. So whilst we do that, can we also be allowed to build our economy? Because we have a right to use our resources to be able to build our resources, to build our economies so that we can beneficiate our communities. This idea that all we are ever going to be as Africans are the producers of resources whose resources then power the West is completely ludicrous. So I think we must stop there. But also, when we talk about Eskom, we're not just talking about corruption, we're talking about inefficiency. How is it that Eskom is unable to detect rocks? That is a basic fundamental principle of QC. Why do you not have QC standards? Why do you not have QC processes? So inefficiencies are key to some of the problems that we are experiencing at Eskom, because if you had efficiencies, then you would know that this coal is not correct. It is not going to provide the amount of power. It's going to destroy these very old power generation units. So when I talk about the canteens, I'm not making a small little thing. The idea is the principle, because the people who own the canteens are people who are family members of politicians. So that speaks to efficiencies. When we talk about Eskom and we're talking about salaries, we're also talking about the executives who are getting crazy amounts of money at the expense of the poor working class that is working at Eskom, because the real people who are working hard at Eskom, the people who are doing the everyday work, do not get paid well. The people who are raking in the money and getting bonuses are people who are sitting in the executive, a bloated executive that does absolutely nothing in terms of ensuring that we have an Eskom that is functional. So yes, we do need to go back into Eskom and fix those efficiencies. And I agree that a conversation needs to happen. I agree that the ANC needs to be taken out of power. I agree that the people of South Africa need to take back their power and decide their own future. They also, South Africans themselves, need to come to the point where together we stop this economy, even if it's for a day or 2 or 5, just so that we can send a message to the state that they cannot continue to abuse our people in this manner, that we have had enough. The whole idea of us being here at NASA is to send a message to the state that you can no longer continue to plunder the resources of our people. You cannot no longer continue to reward inefficiencies and incompetence and corruption. That cannot happen anymore. And like everybody's saying, we are in support of the total shutdown, because up until such time that we use our power, which we have never done as a country, Amandla Asema Sebei, the power is with the people. So up until such time that we show that power and we show teeth to the state to say, you will no longer do this to us. And if you do, we will collapse this economy, we will stop this economy so that other people can take over. People who are genuine, people with a genuine interest to serve the poor masses of our people, because you do not have the interest of South Africans at heart. All you are in it for is for the benefit of your own comrades, your friends, as well as your families. And this we have had enough of.
Kekeletso, I know you need to leave us. Just very quickly, there was a question. I wanted to know, how long are you prepared to camp out at NERSA?
We will be at NERSA until such time that they set aside this 18.65%, because we understand that it is an illegal increase of the budget. We also know that by giving Eskom 331 billion, it does not mean that we are going to end load shedding. So we feel like they should not be rewarding incompetence. They should not be rewarding failure to provide services. So we will be here until they turn this thing around. We were told by them, so we had a meeting with the executives at NERSA, and they said to us in literally in plain simple English, oh no, this thing can be fixed. We can have a meeting with Eskom, and together we can apply to the courts to have a downward downgrade. We can have a downward adjustment of this amount. And so we are waiting for them to call that meeting between themselves and Eskom and to file the papers to have a downward downgrade, because the economy cannot afford this money. The people of South Africa cannot afford this money. But more than anything, Eskom, it does not need money. Eskom needs to fix its problems in terms of efficiencies. It needs to fix itself in terms of corruption. It needs to fix itself in terms of this poison chalice of these deals that have ensured that white monopoly capital continues to benefit at the expense of Black people, and who are Black people who are the landowners. So we agree that we need to expropriate the land. We want to expropriate all of these resources that are necessary for us to be able to build our economy. And that moment is now. We are here to kickstart that moment, because if that does not happen, we will stop this economy.
Well, Kekeletso, thank you very much for that. And I know you need to go, but we do appreciate you taking time out and being part of this panel discussion on Salam Media this evening. We wish you all the best during this sitting at NERSA as well. And I'm sure from time to time, we definitely will touch base and we will follow developments. So all the best to you.
Thank you very much.
Right. We will still continue with the rest of the panel, and I know Zakhele is still online, and I just want to bring Zakhele back into the discussion. Zakhele, just checking, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still very much here and a lot of announcements to make.
Yes, in fact, just after with what Kekeletso is saying, and the whole question surrounding NERSA and the 18.6% increase. Now, this seems to be, the only way out as far as Eskom is concerned is increase after increase. We've heard that over the last few years, we've had something like a 500% increase, considering where we were, as far as electricity costs in this country is concerned. At one point in time, we had the cheapest electricity in the world, and moving from having the cheapest, a 500% increase over the years. And I'm not too sure how long these increases will be taking place. Is going to be year after year, and we are going to get to a stage where people are going to be starving. We've seen it in many parts around the world where people cannot afford basic food items. They cannot afford any basics in their life because of high energy costs, and we are fast heading that way, Zakhele.
Yeah, I wouldn't prefer to talk much about the actual nature of the increase and how it is accumulated to whatever big number it is in the last 15 years. What I can say, every time Eskom has gotten itself to trouble, it has looked where it can get more money. One of that was to continue to ask for this increase. Now, we know that Eskom needs to do certain things, like the lady has just said, that there are other avenues of them to increase their income, to optimize and do all of those sorts of things. And we are now looking back and saying, maybe we shouldn't criticize. Maybe we should step back and ask ourselves, all of these things have accumulated now. They have resulted into a situation where Eskom is in this debt spiral. And every time they want to survive, they ask for a bailout, direct bailout from the government, or they ask for an increase. But that doesn't change anything, because Eskom will still be in the same situation even if they granted them the increase that they wanted. So we are thinking the best way to do is what my fellow panelists have said, that we need to take Eskom back from the government. So we, the allied party, we have committed ourselves to have what we call an Eskom National Conference in this month on the 8th and the 29th. It will be a weekend. The idea is that we would like to invite the media, but the idea is that we want to diagnose the problem. We want to show the snapshot of what's going on, and we will publicize that. Hopefully, after we publicize that, that will trigger the 2-week national dialogue that we're calling for, because we believe there's a myriad of decisions to be made in that basket of all the problems that Eskom and the government have created for themselves. Now, one of those obviously is continuously asking for an increase instead of attending to all these other problems. So we sympathize with the people who just want to zoom in and narrow on this increase. I can tell you now, even if Eskom was to be given zero increase, it's still not going to change anything. If they can be given 3 times the increase that they ask, it's still not going to change anything. It's not going to sort out the coal procurement. It's not going to sort out the debt that we owing. Because every time Eskom, every year, is losing the market share. Eskom is losing the market share by people who are self-generating, people who are looking for alternatives, because Eskom has decided to be absent in the market. So we would rather focus on saying these are men and women who were tasked to look after Eskom as a national utility. They decided not to look after Eskom. What can we do to highlight the things that need to reverse and the decisions that need to be undertaken? And we think the way best way to do that is by organizing a national conference to inform South Africans that all in your hands. You know what needs to be done. We have brought the information to the fore. We have cut out the rhetoric talk. We are giving you the facts as they are. So that is our position. We sympathize with the people who are zooming into this, unfortunately, into this increase, but it's not going to make any difference.
Thank you for that, Zakhele. And I just like the thoughts from Mametlwe as well, being the president of the General Industries Workers Union, looking at it from a worker's perspective. And it is clear that these increases are not going to be affordable. And looking at the working class and the impact that these increases are likely to have.
Yes, I've already said that it is not just 18.6% increase we are dealing with here. We are dealing with, cumulative increases of 800% that increased the price of electricity in this country from among the cheapest in the world to one of the most affordable, which has actually created, as I've said, the problem or crisis rather, not only of the cost of living in general, but the deepening, energy poverty, because we are dealing with unaffordability of electricity alongside, astronomical increases in prices, of oil and its products, petrol, diesel, paraffin, the kind of products that ordinarily will be alternatives for people that want to opt out of the grid. Now, what alternatives are they left? Obviously, for the rich, people can afford solar panels. We need solar panels in this country, but for the working class, the only way that we're going to have in this country is by, a public provision of solar panels. There was a project by ESCOM a few years ago, to install solar panel alongside RDP houses. We want that to be rolled to every informal settlement, to be rolled out in every RDP, and of course to each and every working class household, and those sections of the middle class, the lower middle class that need to be subsidized, those also need to be engaged. The reality is that because in that way, then we can be able to harness the vast, solar power that there is in this country. And I dare to disagree with people that says people pushing a narrative around, climate change are just imperialists. Most of those imperialists are the people that have actually that are responsible for pollution of for most of the pollution of the climate, for fossil fuel and so on. There are struggles of the working class people in Europe, in the US, in advanced capitalist countries that are exerting pressure on those governments to transition. Science says that we need to transition. The impacts are here. It's no longer just scientists that are telling us. We are having a lived experience, experiences of a recurrent and increasingly extreme climate disasters. I've spoken about the floods, but it's not just the floods. We came out of a decade-long and a severe drought that hit big parts of Limpopo and so on. All of that has impacts. As I'm talking to you now, as I've said, it's not only working class people who die. When we have a drought in this country, when the food prices increase, it is the working class that can afford, food prices and so on. But let's get back to the discussion about load shedding. You would have seen the statistics. Manufacturing industry is hammered. Mining industry is having, this is going to be a successive quarter of massive losses. Now, this is a crisis, obviously, of production, it's a crisis of profitability of the capitalist class. But, as with every crisis under capitalism, the capitalist class would make it the crisis for the working class. They would offload it on the working class through restructurings, job losses, attacks on benefits and conditions of employment. Many employers we have seen, when they send workers home because of lack of, because of load shedding, they don't pay them anymore. It's workers who pay for this. We have seen, the reason that we have not recovered many of the jobs that we lost as a result of COVID is because of electricity situation. It's not just small businesses, but actually even major factories and major workplaces are actually cutting on employment, not to mention benefits and other conditions of employment of workers. So this is the crisis which the capitalist class is making sure the working class pay for it, from price or tariff increases to retrenchments in workplaces, attack on conditions, but also, as I've said, one of the biggest achievements of the ANC, notwithstanding everything that we say, which of course is the fact that we have high levels of unemployment, we have housing backlog, they failed by each and every measure. But one of the things that slightly had gotten right was a massive rollout of electrification in the first few years of their government, and that was because of surplus capacity that there was in Eskom, in actual fact, that enabled that. The result of which is that people who ordinarily were dependent, like my mother in rural Limpopo and many other people in rural areas and many other people in townships, from wood and other source of energy, would have now had been having access to electricity because of prices, because of load shedding. We are seeing, and I'm from Limpopo, I've seen that. We are seeing a side of women carrying wood. So it is not just the working class in general, it's black working class women in particular that are bearing the brunt of this crisis. And that is creating a crisis at the level of social reproduction, in the home economy, in the townships, in rural areas. And I think that is a crisis that, for me, rolls back our struggle for equality and gender equality in particular. So there are many facets to this. And I can go on and on in terms of details. What are we saying? I think I've already said, the ANC must go. You see, it doesn't matter what you say. By every measure, from unemployment, housing, energy crisis, levels of crime, gender-based violence, all of that, the deepening crisis of climate change, all of that says that the ANC has run its full course. The ANC must be relieved of power. Now, and I think the fact that they themselves want to march against the ANC in government, it shows that they have no confidence, that their own deployees on themselves are capable of fixing this crisis. I do think that that march, by the way, is an attack. It's a thinly veiled counter mobilization that is reactionary and democratic, but that's a discussion for another day. But the only way that you can read into their action is that they have no confidence that their own deployees are going to resolve this problem in their own terms. So what are we saying? The working class must come with a solution. The working class must impose its own agenda. And that agenda has to start not only with defense of public ownership, but ensuring that we fight for a democratic working class control. The board of directors of Eskom must be made of the representatives of workers of Eskom itself, people who know, from technical point of view, engineering, but also day-to-day operations of Eskom, what need to be done. We need representatives of trade union movement. We need representatives of community civics. We need representatives of, ratepayers, middle class people, and small business people. We need representatives of climate justice movement to ensure that Eskom becomes an accountable public utility, because part of the problem, and I think is the core of the problem that we are faced with, is that public ownership of state-owned enterprises under capitalism is merely used to serve subsidization of corporate profiteering and enrichment of the capitalist class. We want Eskom that will not only be publicly owned, but actually would be a public service that work primarily in the interest of the working class and on the basis of democratic management and control and public ownership. It will be possible for us to talk about how do we transition justly and rapidly. What is justly? Making sure that no worker is left out of the switch from fossil fuels to, of course, renewable. We need to be able to reskill workers at Eskom to ensure that these workers are employed, right, in the manufacturing of the infrastructure for solar, wind power, and other renewable sources of energy and so on. We need to be able to say, when we create these, solar power stations, the wind power stations, all of that, the workers that are currently employed in Eskom, the workers that are currently employed in mining towns like Witbank, in KZN, and all of these areas, these workers need to be retained, but also these communities need to be equipped in order to benefit from this transition so that we are able to build a sustainable post-coal mining communities in these areas, but also no single worker must be able to lose their jobs, but also decent conditions of employment must be provided. That to us is a solution that only the working class, through its organization, through its unity, but more than that, through a program, not only of action, which we believe must be a starting point, including the national shutdown, for which we are organizing a meeting on Sunday to plan about that, but we are saying there must be a political alternative. And for us, as SAFTU, their discussion about a creation of the Workers' Party that would ensure that trade unionists, community activists, climate activists, all of them are united under a banner to say, how do we seize political power? How do we seize economic power in order to ensure that economy work in the interest of majority, not the few?
Well, certainly we will follow developments surrounding this national shutdown. And just finally, Zakhele, the DA has been calling for a declaration of a state of a disaster, and at the same time talking about ring fencing this state of disaster, disaster relief funding from other departments like we had seen during the time of COVID-19 as an interim measure. Is this an interim solution?
Just after, can you say that the DA has been calling for?
They've been calling for a declaration of a state of disaster as far as Eskom is concerned, and as an interim solution, looking at disaster relief funding for Eskom in the interim to try and prioritize some of the problems to keep some of the turbines running in the immediate term.
No, we completely reject that. If we allow that, we are saying that if people have committed crimes, depending on who they are, the law is not applicable to them. The DA must work with us to seek to fundamentally understand how did we get to the debt of currently 296 billion rand. We hear that it was once 187 billion rand. We can't accept any solution that seeks to bail out Eskom or that seeks to bury whatever has happened at Eskom. So we would rather encourage the Democratic Alliance to implement the rule of law, to say people were tasked and they were paid to look after Eskom. It appears that they didn't look after Eskom. In fact, they were complicit into the demise of Eskom. Now, for us, the solution is very simple. As we say, we must have this national dialogue. In fact, we are holding space on Friday or Thursday, holding spaces to build up this. We would rather encourage people who are genuinely concerned, including the DA itself, if they are genuinely concerned, to say, let's first establish the baseline. Let's first establish where exactly are we in terms of the power generation system. And let's ask ourselves, could we have made mistakes by relying on one set group of people and not to hear the other voices? Just to give context to this, we had the Deputy President of Economic Freedom Fighters, Fred Chibambo, saying that we were misled about the corruption nuclear deal. They lied that it was going to be R1 trillion. This is the Deputy President of the EFF that was opposing that deal in Parliament. People must go and apologize to President Zuma. Forget about his scenes and the Guptas and others. We must be able to separate things. People must go and humble themselves and say, President Zuma, because you were up to no good, we made an assumption that anything that comes from you is bad. We are the only country that refused the Russia nuclear deal that could have saved us by now, because the Western countries are going nuclear. England is going nuclear. England has even gone further to even buy out the Chinese with their money and encourage the fiscals of the UK self-fund the nuclear deal. America is everywhere. Bill Gates is building nuclear power plant. The Middle East bloc is booming with nuclear power plants. Here is a little country like South Africa, because this president was hated so much, they were not even willing to hear and understand what was inside the Russia-South African nuclear. I'm saying this on purpose because even though there is a public procurement, a state president and the head of state, he is within his own right to support whatever can. If it was suspected that Zuma was supporting Russia, there was no problem. We knew the other president of supporting. We know the president that we have. He supports everything that comes from America. But we're not going to divert from the real conversation and keep poking him and say, this president is doing everything that Joe Biden asked. I know I'm diverting now. What I'm trying to get at is, let's first humble ourselves and apologize to the men and women who were putting us on the right track. One of those is President Zuma when it comes to nuclear. The economic freedom fighters have apologized. The Democratic Alliance refused to acknowledge that they were wrong. The people who have stolen money, they were in cahoots and in bed with the private sector. The DA is finished protecting the private sector. The politicians could have not stolen all of this money by themselves. So we are strongly opposed to the quick solution of the Democratic Alliance that seeks to come up with a relief fund when the special investigation unit has not been supported, go and recover some of the money that was stolen. This is a special investigation unit on their own, saying that the 79 contractors that the previous CEO Pagani had that they took to court, according to their own calculation, 178 billion rand was stolen. This is a CEO who's leaving now. I told you he will leave before the Easter last year, if you remember. He put in his resignation now under the radar. This is a man who says one statement: it's doubtful that Eskom will ever recover the 5 million rand that was paid by mistake into a small contractor. What happens to follow the money? What happens to trace the money? This is not applicable to this young man and the 5 billion rand. This is a country that we are becoming a lawless country, and we cannot accept the solution of the PA that seeks to say relief fund. Relief fund of what? Eskom is a conglomerate. They've taken it and they've stripped it apart. We need to trace all the money. We need to show that the politicians can be arrested. I keep going back again. President Ramaphosa is doing business with Eskom through his proxies. President Ramaphosa doesn't want to review the independent power producers, 64 of 2011 up to 2014, the first 64 independent power producers that were signed that are responsible for a minimum 21 billion rand wipe-off from the Eskom balance sheet. Reason being is we own 2 of those 64. Let us bring that information onto the floor and show you that when they moved these IPP companies from Sanduga Group, there was no money that was paid. They moved from there to Pembani, to have investment. Not a single cent was paid into Ramaphosa's account. Let us show you all the contracts that are responsible for following out Eskom. Let us show you what Andy Director has been doing compared to the other CEO. Andy Director voluntarily decided to service the loan and pay and repay the loan more than he was supposed to. And he's been hanging around with the competitors of Eskom, which is the independent power producer. We have said Eskom is a dead horse. Every unit that broke down at Eskom, Andy Director never prioritized it. We're getting into the right direction when the African National Congress today decided to call the power station managers. As to whether those power station managers will speak or not, we don't know. So in a nutshell, I'm saying the DA solution of a relief fund, we are not about burying the truth. If we manage to expose a president, a sitting president, a head of state like President Zuma, and it ended up mudding the nuclear deal, which was going to save this country, let's do the same to the others because there are no holy cows. We know if we apply the rule of law, Eskom can be saved because the independent power producers that are 6,500 that they contracted, as we speak here and now, they are only delivering 1,400. What does it mean to create way and a space for someone who says going to supply you 6,500 and when it's peak time, they are only able to supply you 1,400? This is the actual information on the ground, and the Democratic Alliance is aware of it. Now, we cannot jump into the relief fund. I'm sorry. But for me to wrap up from my side, I would say, look out for the ESCOM National Conference on the 28th, 29th. We will inform the extent what needs to be done. Hopefully the media will support us to move towards a 2-week national dialogue. We are seeking to explain to the public that if all of these decisions or if all of these measures are implemented, ESCOM will go back to what it was, and it will be just like any other company. And we're not even asking for things that have not been proven anyway. We are just asking them, please run ESCOM just like they are doing in England, just like they are doing in Germany, just like they are doing in the US. Germany has demonstrated in the entire world that when their country is about to get into a serious trouble, they do not care that they've been preaching that let's not burn coal. In fact, they are arresting even Greta Thunberg. They are arresting the people who are demonstrating for a new mine where they are demolishing an entire village, because the security of Germany comes before the noise that comes from the people. Why are we not doing the same? We need to look after the ESCOM, get it up and running again, and prove once and for all that if you remove corruption, if you remove the government having it on a national utility like this, it can be saved. Let's take it away from the government. That is my parting shot to say the Democratic Alliance, I'm yet to see them being part of the solution other than using whatever they want to use to demonstrate that the ANC cannot govern. All of these things that the DA always comes up with, the fundamental reasoning behind them is that the ANC cannot govern. And I don't think people will vote for the DA because it is never part of the solution. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Zakhele. And Mametlwe, just final thoughts from you?
Yes, just to say, I don't think that, Zuma deserves any apology. Zuma must be in jail. Firstly, to say that, to present him as almost as if Zuma was against an agenda of privatization, that would be, reflect level of confusion, because lots of privatization, most of the independent power producers were actually contracted when Zuma was the president, and lots of them, but I think even less than that actually, were when he was a deputy president. Most of this privatization of ESCOM actually took place under his presidency. So the idea that is a champion of public ownership is simply wrong. Secondly, he is corrupt. He plunged ESCOM and many other state-owned entities into a crisis like no any other. Today, there's no longer SAA. Almost every state-owned entity in this country is insolvent, they are bankrupt, and they are basically collapsing, including ESCOM, which not so long ago used to receive awards for being one of the well-managed entities and so on, for its ability to provide reliable energy, all of that, right? Most of that has happened actually under Zuma and so on. Never mind the fact that he had 10 years to fix the crisis. When he took over, the outlines of the crisis were with us. He did absolutely nothing. If anything, the crisis got worse under his leadership and so on. Ramaphosa just, of course, took it to another level. And if you look, of course, into evidence that is also emerging, it is clear that it is forces aligned to him, because he represents the worst form of capitalism, gangsterism, pure and simple. So there cannot be a place, an insinuation that Zuma can be part of the solution. That is not to say that Ramaphosa is innocent. If anything, these are just different gangs of really the same capitalist class, the same ANC, which is one of the biggest scam in this country. Now, the only way that we can really have way forward, as I've said, is on the basis of working class leadership, on the basis of democratic movements of the working class and its organizations, And I've spoken about, workers in this country are organized into millions, in trade unions, communities. In each and every community, there's a civic in this country. The students are having movements that are fighting all the time around issues of, access to education. All of those movements, alongside movements around climate, people that are concerned about energy justice, all of that. We have a vast networks of organizations that I think need to come together, need to coordinate, need to unite in order to reflect about solutions. As a Marxist, I don't think, you can just talk about as South Africans. South Africa, like every modern capitalist society, divided around class lines. And this crisis is manufactured by the ruling class in its own interest, want to advance the private, agenda of privatization, but also it came about precisely because of the attempt at advancing that very same agenda. Now, we need, as I've said, a solution based on public ownership. We need a solution based on private, on working, of working class control. But none of these are going to come of their own. We need to organize. We need to fight. That's the reason we need to go on the streets, as seen yesterday. And what does that look like? We are planning a meeting, a public meeting, this Sunday. We are in conversation with SAFTU. We are in conversation. We are appealing to other trade unions, and I'm hopeful that probably, leadership of SAFTU are reflecting on this, because I've had discussion with the General Secretary of SAFTU, Comrade Zulunzi Mavavi, yesterday, and we are saying that we need to push, the meeting on Sunday, where we bring all of these activists from climate justice community and student movement, trade unions, and so on, and we need to name a date for a national shutdown. We need to discuss a strategy. How do we sustain that? Because just going on the street a day after, then we disappear and they carry on as if it's business as usual. That doesn't solve the problem. More than that, we can't just protest. We need a political strategy. We need a political alternative, not only to the ANC, to the DA and all the parties of the capitalist class, EFF included. And how do we do that? We need obviously to rebuild the mass organizations of the working class, many of which are already there. Every street in this country has either a community forum, a crisis committee. The problem is a problem of coordination. The problem is a problem of unity of the trade union movement. The problem is a problem of unity of many climate justice movements and so on. But that is a problem of political program. That is the reason we need a mass workers' party on a socialist program that would ensure that, as I've said, we can elevate the working class not only into political power, but by means of nationalizations of the mines, of the banks, of the factories, and the commanding heights of the economy. We can bring the economy into public ownership on the basis of the democratic control and management of the working class to solve not only an energy crisis, but also the crisis of unemployment, crisis of housing, crisis of access to education, health, and many other services, including housing in this country, because that is a scale of the crisis that we are faced. We need to rebuild the industrial capacity. We need to rebuild the infrastructure. Our roads are collapsing. Every public infrastructure in this country is in tatters because of neglect, because of corruption, because of plunder through tenders that are not delivering on their promises and contracts. So we need a working class leadership to overcome this crisis. And for us, that is what socialism is about. Working class taking control, not only of the economy, but of its own lives and its own destiny into its own hands, and of course, determining its fate on the basis of its democratic organization.
Well, Mametlwe Sebei, and also to Zakhele Madela, and earlier on we had Ruse Moleshe. Unfortunately, we lost her, but Thando Makhubu said that he had to go off because of load shedding, and Kekeletso Khena as well. Thank you to all of you for being part and parcel of this discussion right here on Salam Media, and I believe we have unpacked quite a bit in terms of this particular aspect with regard to Eskom, and also the whole question surrounding this talks about this declaration of the state of disaster. So to all of you, once again, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. We wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, and have a lovely evening to you and to your listeners.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of the discussion tonight, Wednesday nights, with myself, United Body. And it's been most absorbing, and I think there's just so much that actually came out of this discussion. But the key issue here at the end of the day is, whether a state of disaster will actually help in sorting out the interim problem as far as Eskom is concerned. Or are we looking at a worse scenario? But clearly the signs are ominous from what we've seen, talking about darker days ahead. And last month, we've seen the utility announcing that load shedding would continue until 2027. Can this country afford load shedding until 2027? And it appears as from what Praveen Gordhan had to say in May 2022, that he says we are not in a state of disaster because we do have options, and the options to free up capacity, all we got to do is move to higher and higher levels of load shedding. We've seen what stage 5 and stage 6 has done to us. Can you imagine when we get to stage 8? And with that, I'm going to leave you with that thought. It's been wonderful being in your company. It's been wonderful coming back of social media. We wish you all the best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.